Hello. I'm going to talk to you today about critical thinking, problem solving, and why we did some of the things that we did throughout this course. So, as I tried to show you in the last presentation, which I tried to basically perform as a speech, this time I'm going to try to perform more as a teacher should. Now, some of you are going to see something you may have never seen before. I hope that's not the case, but it's probably true. I'm going to draw. I'm not going to use a PowerPoint slide. I'm going to draw. You should be drawing all the time. When you take notes, you should be drawing. We know this from brain science. We know this from learning science. Most teachers have never heard this because most teachers, unfortunately, don't have conversations with neuroscientists. But when I draw, you're going to have to try to figure out why something means what it means or looks the way it looks, because I'm not a very good artist. In fact, the worse you are at drawing, the more you should do it in terms of taking notes. You can increase your ability to remember 11%. And if you go back and review that at the end of the night, you can actually increase by another 14% over people who just write down notes and try to use a highlighter. It's one of the worst practices in the world, by the way, for actual learning. Okay, so with that said, let me share my screen and try to show you some information about why we did what we did during this class. Now, again, in the last presentation, I talked about why we need to communicate, why you need to be better at communicating, why you need to take the information from this class and actually leverage it. I know how most classes work. You study, you really cram. Teachers actually help you do it. They give you worksheet after worksheet after worksheet after worksheet, then they test you on exactly what that worksheet was about. You do really well in the test, you get a B or an A or whatever, you leave with your grade, and then 3 months later, you have forgotten almost all of it. How do I know that that happens? Because we have lots and lots of research that shows that's what happens to just about everybody. We don't learn much at all. But remember, at the end of the last video, I said that one of the keys to getting ahead in the future is critical thinking. Well, critical thinking now requires not just sort of using your brain. It's not just about being able to sort of naturally be born with something. It doesn't work that way. When we talk about problem solving, when we talk about critical thinking, what that actually means is we have to put a magnifying glass on it. We actually have to take whatever that thing is that we're reviewing, and we have to make it really obvious. We have to say, hey, this is what's going on. See, we know from books like Make It Stick, The Case Against Education, Cracks in the Ivory Tower, that people don't learn, and they also don't learn how to learn. A lot of teachers will say, well, I'm not teaching science, I'm teaching my students how to think. No, that's not true. Students aren't learning the primary objective of science. They're certainly not learning a secondary objective of thinking, especially if the science teacher is not calling out, hey, here's how you think about this. The history teacher that says, I'm not teaching history as much as I'm teaching problem solving. No, you're really not. Because if you're teaching problem solving, then you're actually uncovering, you're peeling back that onion and looking at all the different layers and saying, here's how you should use this to problem solve. But again, we don't do that. So what we need to do is start to look at why. Now, this again is another really big problem for our education system, because our education system loves to answer the question, how? But it's really, really bad at answering the question, why? Now, when you think about how, again, let's go back to our worksheets. How many classes have you had where you've gotten worksheet after worksheet after worksheet after worksheet? What is that? It's how. You're supposed to take this algorithm. You're supposed to dissect this sentence. You're supposed to look at this particular plane or those sorts of things. But why, when you have a triangle, do the angles add up to 180? Why? Do you know why? Why, when you do long division, 61 into 21,622, why do you put things here and indent for your next item? Why? Why do you always have a remainder? Can you tell me that? Can your teachers tell me that? Because a lot of teachers can't. They can tell you how. They can tell you how all day long, but they really struggle to tell you why. And as a result, you never hear why, because you're too busy doing worksheet after worksheet after worksheet, which is great if you get the exact question phrased in exactly the right way every time. But the moment that it changes, you don't get that because you don't know why. It also means that you're going to lose the how much, much faster when you don't know the why. So that's one of the first problems that we have when it comes to being a critical thinker or a problem solver. At the same time, there's the problem of transference. See, your instructor as they're teaching you, this is what they want you to learn, these little things right here. What you actually end up learning is all this stuff out here. Now, some of it overlaps, but some of it doesn't, because we add context to things. Our brains are good at doing that. We add elements that aren't there. We add elements that shouldn't be there. We are not really good when it comes to transference, of taking a piece of information and using it. There's a really famous study that's been done many, many times, where there was a general who wanted to take a city. They wanted to take all the fortresses in the city and all this stuff. Well, there was a problem. The road to get into that was bombed. There was mined. And so the general couldn't take all of his troops along that road because they would blow up and the entire army would have died. So after talking with some colonels and some lieutenants and some majors, he agreed to take a couple of smaller roads with just smaller groups of men and to send them on that path so that they could take the road, take the city all at the same time. They could actually all converge on the city at the same moment from these smaller roads that had not been mined, and sure enough, they were able to take it because they had a coordinated effort. That's great. That story is told to research participants, to students, to people in classrooms, to teachers, to all sorts of different manner of people. And then they learn some other things, they go on with their day, they have some other parts of the experiment that go on. And about 2 hours later, they're presented with another situation. They are told that there is a woman, and this woman has a huge cancerous tumor inside of her stomach. Now, they happen to have a laser that will probably destroy the tumor. But the problem is that it's so powerful that it will also destroy all sorts of tissue in and around the stomach. And the person, this woman that's got the tumor, will very likely die. Participants are then asked a simple question: what should doctors do? Now, you've got the benefit of not having heard my first story 2 hours ago. You heard it about 2 minutes ago. And so now you're saying, well, just take smaller versions of the laser and attack the tumor from multiple sides, right? Makes sense. That's transferring the information from what you just heard. Good job. Unfortunately, when this happens in a research study after 2 hours, 87% of people don't get it right. Their answer is, well, just shoot the thing with the laser. I hope she doesn't die. She probably will, but she's going to die anyway, so you might as well do it. Nobody thinks to themselves about that story they learned about the general in the city and splitting up the forces. Nobody thinks about that. They just say, shoot away. Hope she's okay. See, that's transference. The human brain is very bad at transference. Why? Our brains want to be efficient. They don't want to think. They don't want to problem solve. They want to do whatever's easiest. And whatever's easiest is what's always been done before. And so we always sort of go back to what's been done before. And if we know something, we fall back on that. And if we don't know something, we say, I don't have time to think through that, because we don't want to think. That's not what our brains like to do. So when we focus on the how and not the why, and then we expect people to transfer, it's not going to add up. It just doesn't work that way. This semester, I have tried to show you all sorts of things about communication. We have tried to talk about the formula for speech, talked about, have your attention getter first. We've talked about how you want to have a preview. We've talked ad nauseum about having credibility, right? Credibility is a huge thing that you have to have. We talked about that a lot. But we also talked about some ancillary stuff. We talked about, for example, politics. I tried to show you that we've got some problems with politics. We have Democrats versus Republicans in this country. We are as polarized as we've ever been. At my age, I'm now 50, you get to know a lot of people in life. And I know a sitting congressman. I'm not going to say if it's a senator or a person in the House. I'm not going to say what party they belong to, but I know them pretty well. And I've had a conversation with this person. And I said to them about a year and a half ago, I said, what's going on in Washington? Why all the politics? And the response that I got was very interesting. They said, you know what? If I'm a Republican and I'm ever caught having a conversation or a dinner with a colleague who's a Democrat, when I go up for re-election again, I won't get any money from the Republican Party. If I'm a Democrat, I won't get any money from the Democrat Party. All I have to do is earn money. That's my whole job, is to earn money and to send it, not to use it myself, but to send it back to the party. They will then use that money for the battleground stuff. I'll get a percentage of it. So he said, look, if I raise $10 million, I'll get $2 million for my campaign, because I'm probably in a place where everyone's going to vote for me because I'm a Republican or a Democrat. That's sort of how it works. And the other 8 million will then go to help other Democrats or to help other Republicans who are now running in much, much harder places. But if that person is caught having a conversation with someone from the other party and it wasn't approved by the party, well, now they don't get up for re-election. They're not going to get reelected. This is why you see votes that are all Democrats, all Republicans. They all vote for stuff, even when the whole rest of the country's going, why would you vote for that? That's stupid. That's horrible. Why would you do that? You can really look and see what's going on if you want to look at the ridiculousness of the time change. Everybody hates the time change, everybody. A lot of people don't even know why the time change exists. A lot of people think it has to do with farmers. It has nothing to do with farmers. It was created by the Germans in World War I. We are literally doing something that they were wrong about, and we filtered it out to many, many countries in the world that still do this, including the United States. We have a time change. Now, that time change ends up killing people. It not only helps us, really lose some sleep, but it also has results with car accidents and heart attacks and all sorts of really bad stuff. We should get rid of it, right? The problem is this: if a Democrat puts forward a bill about the time change, no Republican will vote for it. If a Republican puts forth a bill with a time change, no Democrat will vote for it, because they don't want to let the other team win anything. They don't want to let them concede to win a single thing. That's where our politics is. Now, why do I tell you that? Well, I'm going to quote Noam Chomsky here for a second. If you've never seen Noam Chomsky, then first of all, you didn't read some of the stuff that we talked about this year. But Noam Chomsky is sort of America's politician, political scientist. He was from MIT. He's still alive. He's in his late 90s, I think. But he has talked about how, as an independent, that he believes that anybody who is a Democrat or a Republican at this time in our history is just hurting our country. He has voted for Democrats. He has voted for Republicans, for presidents, for governors, for all sorts of things. He does not look at a party. He looks at a person. He doesn't look at a party. He looks at a specific bill or a cause or a process. See, when you vote party over everything else, you're giving them exactly what they want. Now, Noam Chomsky is very interesting because he's researched this for his entire career. And here's what he has to say. He said, today, if you look actually back at 1970 and 1970 for the Republicans, that where people sat was a little conservative and a little liberal. Since then, if this was the middle of the road, the Democrats have actually pushed this way, and the Republicans have pushed further conservative. Now, why would they do that, you might wonder? Well, it all happened in 1978. A political analyst for the Republican Party came up and said, you know what? We're not able to meet the needs of our constituents. Now, who are the constituents that the Republicans serve? Well, the Republicans serve the rich. They need to get the wealthy more money. That's their whole purpose. That's why the Republicans exist. That's why they get the funding they get. That's why they have the backers they have. This is why they do things like trickle-down economics. If I give a huge tax cut to the rich, then it will trickle down to the everyday average person. We now know that that's not true. Nobel Prize winning professors and scientists and researchers have shown over and over and over again that's ridiculous. It never happens. We can just watch this over the last 4 years. We've seen it where they've gotten massive breaks in taxes. They've gotten a lot of money that they've been able to keep. Jeff Bezos has put a third more of his fortune in terms of becoming a multi-billionaire, almost a trillionaire. And yet, no one else is making money. Why? Because they didn't give money to employees. They didn't hire new people. They bought back stock. Then, of course, the pandemic hits and, oh no, we don't have any money. Government, bail us out, which they do, which, by the way, is a form of socialism. So when you have subsidies of almost any form, of almost any kind, you have socialism. When you see the government give money to certain crops and not other crops, when they give money to soybeans, when they give money to corn, and then they don't give money to lettuce or zucchini, when you see them give money to dairy, but you don't see them give money to organic, well, the government is subsidizing one over another. And what they're saying is, we want to help you so that you can get more powerful and you can make more money, and that'll be great. Now, on the other side, you've got the Democrats. The Democrats aren't nearly as interested in money as they are in control. The Democrats want to control what everybody does, and they would love to be able to control what everybody thinks. Now, when the Republicans moved farther right and said, look, in order to get people to vote for us so that we can give the rich money, we've got to come up with some hot button issues that people will vote for, only caring about those hot button issues. And that's what they did. They found that guns, abortion, and tax breaks, that was what it was all about. That's all that they care about. Because they know that there are people who don't care about guns, they don't care about taxes, but they care deeply about abortion. And so if they say, well, if you vote for us, then you're voting against abortion, then okay, I'll vote for you even though I don't get any other benefit out of that. Well, that's stupid. At the same time, on the other side, you have the Democrats saying, well, you know what we're going to do is we're going to take some of those hot button issues as well. And we're going to talk about gun control. And we're going to talk about freedom of choice. And we're going to talk about taxes against the rich. And so that's their hot button issues. And so there's people who say, I don't really care about anything else, but I do definitely want taxes against the rich. And so I'll vote for that. So they will always vote for Democrats versus people who say, oh, I got to have my guns. And as long as I have my guns, well, I will always vote for Republicans. And what do Republicans do with that? They give more and more and more money to the rich, while the middle class and the lower class really lose out. At the same time, the Democrats take that money, they really hurt the rich, they try to help the poor, and the middle class really, really loses out. That's why Noam Chomsky says, pick people, not parties. Don't get caught up thinking, if I only vote for one thing, look what happens. You can even see this at work today. Look at the last several years. The Republicans have said, well, we've got the most anti-abortion president we've ever had. Interesting, because this is a man who has paid women to go get abortions. And yet he's apparently giving people judges that are super, super conservative. And one day those conservative judges will do something that really ticks off conservatives. That's how it always works. It's how it's worked in the early 1900s. It's how it's worked in the 1950s. It's how it works in the early 2000s. That's how it will work. And yet we've got people who are staunchly saying, no. The Republican Party is the party of this. The Democrat Party is the party of that. Well, you've got people in those parties who won't talk to each other. They can't talk to each other. So you effectively have got our decisions for our government being made by less than 20 people on both sides. That's stupid. That's where we live. We talked about politics. Why? Because I wanted to make sure that you could think beyond what you were told by your parents or by your grandparents. My grandparents listened to Rush Limbaugh and they watched Fox News every day of their lives until they died. I felt sorry for them because they were lied to. That Fox experience is cherry-picked like nobody's business. They urge on racism. They urge on people loathing other people. Same thing with MSNBC. Anybody who gets all of their information from that or from NPR or whatever, if that's the only place you get your information, well, you're going to get a heaping healthy dose of all sorts of liberal agendas. You can't listen to either on the extremes, and those are extremes. Fox News is a bunch of liars. MSNBC is a bunch of liars. So stop it. And it's not so much that they are necessarily lying to your face. They're just leaving out other stuff. Now, CNN does it a little less. ABC does it a little less. NBC is pretty good. CBS is probably one of the better of the big networks. But then you've got stuff like the BBC. You know why the BBC is so excellent? Because they don't care. The BBC is in another country. They're just reporting what's going on. They're not saying, well, this is what should happen and this is what could happen. I'm going to leave this out so that you don't understand the whole story, which is exactly what these groups over here are doing. If you want to think, you've got to do a couple things. You've got to watch both sides. You've got to actually look at both sides. And then you got to pay attention while also getting some analysis from somewhere in the middle. That's how you think. That's how you get to a place where you say, I'm not just going to vote for a person because they belong to that party. I'm going to vote for a person because they have integrity. That's one of the things we can do. The next thing that we talked about was food. Now, when it comes to food, I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not a hot button issue for most people. Most people don't even think about food. They never have. They've never thought about what they put in their bodies. Although I would please urge you to think about something you put in your bodies 3, 4, 5 times a day, every day of your lives. How can that not have health ramifications? It has to. It absolutely has to. But when it comes to food, I also wanted to show you that there is another side to a coin many of you didn't ever think about. Now, there are some amazing researchers out there, like Michael Greger, T. Colin Campbell, Esselstyn, Ornish, Klaper. These guys are people who have been studying the whole food, plant-based diet for 40, 50, 60 years. T. Colin Campbell is a professor at Cornell. Greger actually is a medical doctor who donates every dime he makes off of vegan speaking and talking about whole food plant-based. He donates every dime to charities. These are not people who are being paid by the meat industry. They're not people who are being paid by the dairy industry, which is interesting because when you look at most other countries in the world today, as they start to develop their food plates like we all have, did you know that America is one of the only places left that has milk on our plate? Why? Because the dairy lobby sits at the table of who decides what goes on the plate. So we have servings of dairy. You know who just got rid of this last year? Canada. They said no more. We're not going to have dairy sitting at the table telling us that we should have their product because it's not good for us. Now, when I say it's not good for us, I'm saying it's not good for anybody. Now, you don't have to like that. You don't necessarily have to appreciate it, but it's true. Campbell actually was able to take, oh wow, this is really a really bad drawing you're about to see of a mouse, all right? They actually took mice and they gave them cancer. You know how they gave them cancer? Casein, the stuff in dairy. Now they were actually able to make the cells go up and go down based on how much or how little protein that those animals got from whey and from casein. They could dial it up and dial it down whenever they wanted to. And they could dial it up so much that they killed them quickly or they could kill them slowly. They literally did that through milk. Casein, milk, the problems with it, it causes trouble in the human system. It causes trouble in any system. We are the only mammal on earth that drinks another mammal's fluid. That's silly on its face, but that is something that we know to be true. Now, again, you may not like it. I love cheese. I love ice cream. I was okay. I used to drink a jug of milk a week when I was growing up because I didn't know this stuff, but now I do. It's not healthy for us, but there is a ton of money involved. At the same time, when you look at food, you can also look at how this particular lifestyle, the whole food, plant-based lifestyle, actually can help us with 13 of the 15 leading causes of death in our country. So if you listen to guys like Michael Greger, he actually has a quote where he says 5,000 hours in the gym is no match for a whole food plant-based diet. It's just not. You can't exercise your way out of this. You can't do other things to mitigate what you're literally putting in your body that's going in systemically. So if you want to look at heart disease, cancer, respiratory failure like COPD, stroke, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, kidney failure, if you want to look at even suicide, we know the benefits of a plant-based diet on the brain and what that can do for depression. You can look at in terms of septicemia, liver failure, Parkinson's disease, pneumonitis. 100,000 people a year die from medication. 100,000 die because they're on meds. Esselstyn was able to take people off of meds because they had heart disease, and he was able to reverse heart disease. He was actually able to reverse it. How? Food. through what they did or did not eat. So as you look at one of the major problems you're going to face, I'm going to face, we just assume, well, our bodies are getting old, we're susceptible to it. No, that's just not true. T. Colin Campbell, when he went to China to prove that meat and dairy was better for the human body. That's why he went there, because his father worked in cattle ranching and dairy, and that's where he worked. So he went over to this group of people who had never experienced that stuff. They had very small quantities of meat throughout their lifetime, and they had no dairy. He introduced it. He helped with this huge, called the China Study. It's a book, you should read it. Within one generation, they had Alzheimer's disease, they had heart disease, they had cancer, they had COPD, they had type 2 diabetes, they had kidney disease, they had all of these problems. It's not good for the human body. That's a big number one, okay? Disease. Number two, let's talk about climate. Now again, most Americans buy into the notion that there is climate problems. I realize the politicians don't want to talk about it. They don't want to agree, because if one says the other's right, then now they're agree. That's never going to happen. That's again because of what we just talked about. But you and I both know that climate it's an issue. It's a problem, and it's really, really causing problems. Well, did you know that according to the New Scientist, that 60% of all climate issues could be fixed if humans ate a whole food plant-based diet? Oxford did a study where they found that people who eat meat are contributing twice as much than those who are eating mostly a vegetable-based diet to the problems with climate. You look at emissions from the animals, it's tremendous. 14% of the emissions would go away if we didn't have the factory farms that we had. If we only had local farms, if that's all we had, 14% of the emissions that go up into the atmosphere and destroying or polluting our system would go away. But of course, we're not going to do that, because factory farms is where we get our meat. As you heard from Gary Yourofsky, that's where 99% of people get their meat. Even people who work on those small farms, they take their cows and they take their pigs and they take stuff and they send it into others. Doesn't matter. They still go to Walmart and to Publix and to Kroger and to wherever else to buy that stuff. And so they're getting it from a factory farm. We actually know that certain kinds of meats have literally been labeled a carcinogen by our government. We still sell them. They don't sell them like tobacco products that they used to put the skull and crossbones on. You can still go buy bacon. You can still go buy sausage. You can still go buy bologna in the lunch meat section, and then you can give it to your kids and send it with them to lunch. But they're carcinogenic. We know they cause cancer. We know that they do, but they also cause climate crisis. Now, one of the reasons that they cause climate crisis is because of what they do to our land and our water. Our land and our water are being destroyed by animals. If we were to stop doing farming of cattle and pigs and that sort of thing in this country and just use that land for vegetables, you know, we could feed the planet, the whole planet, not just America. We could feed the entire planet with what we would do with that. But instead, we let those cows and those pigs and those chickens poop and pee all over that land, and it saturates down in, and we screw up the water table and we screw up the land itself, and it becomes unusable for decades, if not centuries. And we've got more and more and more unusable land all over the earth, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Now, I already talked to you about fish, and if you look at fish, they are enveloping and they're ingesting plastic. They're eating plastic regularly. So are some of the other animals, especially those that are close to rivers and stuff like that, because the Teflon crisis, when those companies like DuPont started pumping their stuff out into the water because it was too expensive to dispose of it correctly, they literally polluted the planet with plastic. Did you know that in the average week, the average American eats and drinks the equivalent of a credit card's worth of plastic? That's what we consume. Plastic. So if you give up fish, which is the heaviest problem with plastic, if you give up those animals, well, you're not going to have as much plastic. You know the fourth problem that we have with being meat eaters? We've got zoonotic disease. We all just lived through the pandemic. We're still living through the pandemic. Now, whether this was built through a lab in Wuhan or it came out of a wet market in Wuhan, doesn't matter. The animals get together and they breed viruses. Now, you may not thinking about it with this particular case, but you can look back at almost everything that we've dealt with, from the swine flu to the bird flu, H1N1, MERS, SARS, hoof and mouth disease. This comes from animals passing diseases onto us. Animals we shouldn't be working with in that way because they are so contaminated. And yet that's exactly what happens. So we are literally getting ready to perpetuate another pandemic, and they're going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, the last thing I'm going to tell you is this. I am a vegan. I don't call myself that. I call myself a whole foods plant-based eater. Up until about 3 years ago, when I knew all of this information, when I had put all of this together, and it took years to do, I had been on several journeys because I was pretty heavy. I was a pretty heavy dude. I'm 6'5", but I weighed, at one point, I weighed 315 pounds. Today, I weigh 193. Now, I tried the keto diet. I tried the carnivore diet. I tried the Mediterranean diet. I've probably tried any diet, the cabbage soup diet. I've tried everything. And that's when I started to find out that it has very little to do with the diets people are recommending, and it has everything to do with insulin, with how you do or don't create insulin, with how often you create insulin. And you know what creates insulin that has a long, long tail? Meat and dairy. Dairy is so full of sugar that it's just going to spike you with glucose immediately anyway, and then you're going to keep that all along the way. So if you want to add a fifth one to this stuff's making us fat. I know a lot of people say that carbs make you fat. No, sugar makes you fat. And there's a lot of sugar in dairy. And the lingering effects of oil and fats in diet keep your insulin spiked for a very long time. And that's going to make it very difficult for you to lose any weight. So if you want to look at the diseases we have internally, if you want to look at climate change, if you want to look at the diseases that we're spreading around the world, if you want to look at what we're doing to our land and to our oceans, or even if you want to look at the obesity crisis, and we have an obesity crisis. Did you know that the Army can't get enough people to sign up because of two reasons? Because high schoolers coming out of high school don't know how to think, they can't pass the tests, and they're too fat to pass the physicals. They can't run that far. They can't do that many push-ups. They can't do that many pull-ups. They can't do that many sit-ups. Those are the two reasons that the Army, and I've gone down and talked with the Army in Tampa at the bases down there, talking about how to fix and transform things, and they don't know what to do because people don't think and people don't know how to take care of their bodies. We talked about two things that we could do in this class to take care of all of that. If you want to be a critical thinker and a problem solver, you've got to know a lot of information. You got to be able to pull this together. You got to look for the stuff that's true and not true. You can't just go to Google and type in, is chicken healthy for you? You're not going to get a good answer, especially if you only look at one source. So those of you who came into our conversations about politics and about food and anything else that we talked about, filter bubbles, and you went and you looked up one thing, good for you. You're on the path. But you should look up 5 more things, 10 more things, 20 more things in order for you to actually be in the know. And if you're not in the know, well, then you're pretty easy to manipulate. You're a person who politicians will say, good, I'll put that one hot button issue in front of them and they'll vote for me and then I can do whatever else I want to do. But if you're a thoughtful person, if you're a person who doesn't just vote for a party, but instead you vote for a person, or instead you vote for a cause, or instead you vote for something that is meaningful while also looking at all the ramifications that has if it comes in. If you're a person who just eats what you eat because you've always eaten it, well, you now know that that's a fallacy in reasoning, but okay, you can do that. But if you don't, if instead you say, wait a minute, I've got to look at this, I've got to explore this. Well, you have some names of some people you can look at. You don't have to believe me. I'm not the one who did this research. Look up T. Colin Campbell, look up Greger. Look up Campbell, look up Esselstyn, look up Ornish, look up Michael Klaper. As you start to examine what they're talking about, these are men who are not being paid by anybody to promote this stuff. They just say, here's the research, here's the science that says this won't kill you. Well, you're going to be in a better place. And if you can apply that to every other part of your life, innovation, creativity, cleverness, to your job, to the way that you drive, to what happens with technology, to all the stuff we talked about with filter bubbles, and not just focusing on any one thing, but looking at everything, man, you're going to have an impressive life. What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do as we move forward? That's the question you have to answer. I look forward to reading your answers for that this week, but I'm really curious to see how this affects you 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now. Because if you keep this stuff with you, you will be changed as a person. And that's exciting. Good luck and good learning.